And when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then, there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And then the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once, his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. The gospel of the Lord. Praise be to Christ.
I don't know what got you out of bed this morning and set you on your way to church. On a day when you could be doing any number of things, skiing or lounging around home or sleeping in, I wonder what brought you to make the effort to be here. Maybe it was a parent who nudged you to be here today, or maybe it was your kids. Maybe it was the draw of seeing friends and being part of the community. Maybe it was the thought of singing together. Maybe it was the sense that you needed a good word today, or a place to bring your disappointments after a difficult week, or a place to gently hold on to your hopes next to others. Or maybe, just maybe, you were hoping that we would be talking about an exorcism. Actually, I'd be rather surprised if you were drawn here today by the prospect of an exorcism story in church. We should probably talk after the service, if that was the case. But in any event, it's the beauty of gathering around the scriptures together. We don't always get what we had in mind, but we do get God, meeting us in sometimes surprising ways. We have an exorcism story this morning, a battle between a demon who has lots to say in his local worship service and Jesus. And what's more, this is not just any exorcism story. It is the first action of Jesus' public ministry in the Gospel of Mark. And that's worth noticing. When a politician is elected, much is made of her first actions in office. We watch carefully to see how she will begin. Who will she meet with? What will she speak about? What legal directives will she take? What tone will she set? We watch those first actions closely with a new politician because they often give us some insight into the priorities and the vision of the new leader. Is this going to be someone broadly concerned with the needs of all, or mostly with the needs of those on top? Is he going to take courageous stands, even when they're unpopular? Or is he going to do whatever it takes to keep his base happy? Is she going to set a tone of mutuality or one of division? Does this person see the wider world as a threat or as a community filled with allies and friends? We watch those first actions of a leader closely with good reason, and the Gospels seem to want us to do the same thing when it comes to Jesus. Each of the Gospels tells us right off the bat, in the first chapter, that this Jesus is a very important character. Each sets the stage with words and images that show us we can expect great things from this guy, and then each begs us to watch closely as Jesus begins to do what he came to do. In Matthew, he teaches. In Luke, he unintentionally starts a riot in his hometown. In John, he turns water into wine. And in Mark, he tangles with a demon. In each case, you can imagine the gospel writers choosing this first public action very carefully, using it to make a statement about what Jesus came to do, who he came to be, how he will operate in the world. It's only natural. We watch those first actions closely. They can tell you a lot about a leader. So what does the first action in the Gospel of Mark tell us about Jesus? What is the big statement that he is trying to make? Well, I think you could imagine that with putting an exorcism right at the start of Jesus' ministry, Mark is trying to knock our socks off with just how strong and powerful this Messiah, Jesus, is. I mean, not every possible Messiah can talk tough with demons and send them off whimpering into the ether. Just look at what a brawny Messiah this one is, Mark could be saying. Just wait till you see what he does to anyone who gets in his way. You could imagine that Mark starts off Jesus' story this way to convince us of Jesus' power. Except that the word that comes up in this reading is not power, but authority. That's what impresses the people around Jesus according to this story. Not his power, but his authority. It might seem like we're splitting hairs over words here, but really power and authority are not the same thing. The British writer G.K. Chesterton was having a meal in a restaurant with a friend when the conversation turned to this topic of the distinction between power and authority. And at one point, Chesterton said, "If a rhinoceros were to enter this restaurant right now, there is no denying that he would have great power here. But I should be the first to rise and assure him that he had no authority whatsoever." Authority is not the same thing as power. You can have lots of brute strength, like a rhinoceros in a restaurant. You can toss tables around and cause plenty of damage and send people running in every direction. You can have power, but still miss that more slippery, elusive quality of authority. Of course, by the end of this story that we read today, we learn that Jesus does have power of that forceful sort. He can command demons, after all. But when the story begins, the audience around him knows nothing of that. As far as the people gathered in the synagogue are concerned, Jesus doesn't actually have much power when he enters the building, not of any official sort. He's not the governor. He's not the high priest. He doesn't come with any fancy theological degree. He is a local boy from the village up the road, not exactly a recipe for raw power. They will learn about the power he possesses when the demon speaks, but before that, he's just Jesus, just that guy from Nazareth. I think that's important to notice, because while he is still just that to them, while he is still just someone from their community, unremarkable in his credentials, unremarkable in terms of the power he holds, he stands up to teach. And what he says is not just nice, not just smart, not just impressive or interesting. It's a teaching with authority. That is what the people say to one another. So power and authority aren't the same thing. But just what is the difference? Max Weber says that the difference has something to do with coercion. If a person with power asks you to do something, you have to do it because he says so. If a person with authority asks you to do something, though, you can choose to do it out of respect for who that person is to you. The one relies on coercion and force, the other on a response that is freely given. As I was thinking about that distinction this week, a poem came to mind. This is a poem by Stephen Dunn, and I will warn you that it's not pretty, but I think it paints one vivid picture of what authority can look like. Dunn teaches at a university in the United States, and the poem takes place in that setting, with people gathered after a professor has died. It's called On the Death of a Colleague. She taught theater, so we gathered in the theater. We praised her voice, her knowledge, how good she was with Godot, and just 4 months later with Gigi. She was 50, the problem in the liver. Each of us recalled an incident in which she'd been kind or witty. I told about being unable to speak from my diaphragm, and she told me to lie down, placed her hand where the failure was, and showed me how to breathe. But afterward, I could only do it when I lay down, and that became a joke between us. And I told it as my offering to the audience. I was on stage, and I heard myself wishing to be impressive. Someone else spoke of her cats, and no one spoke of her face or the last few parties. The fact was, I had avoided her for months. It was a student's turn to speak, a sophomore, one of her actors. She was a drunk, he said, often came to class reeking. Sometimes he couldn't look at her, the blotches, the awful puffiness. And yet she was a great teacher. He loved her, but thought someone should say what everyone knew, because she didn't die by accident. Everyone was crying, and it was almost over now. The remaining speaker, a historian, said he would cut his speech short, and the chairman stood up as if by habit, said something about loss, and thanked us for coming. None of us moved, except some students, to the student who had spoken, and then others moved to him, across dividers, down aisles, to his side of the stage. Who has the authority in this scene? It's not the people with institutional power, not the chairman or the history professor, not the speaker who found himself on stage trying to be funny and impressive. The person with the authority here is the student who spoke up, the one people are moving to by the end, across dividers and aisles. And where did that authority come from? In this case, I think it came from telling the truth. He named the truth everyone around was trying to tiptoe beside, the drinking that killed this professor, and he did it with love, which is not a bad way to talk about the kind of authority in Jesus' life and ministry. He never shied away from telling the truth about the broken places in the lives of those he encountered. He didn't shy from asking people to make great sacrifices, to leave home, to leave possessions, to leave prejudices. He didn't shy from naming the demons among and within us, idolatry and greed and self-centeredness. And yet his truth-telling was all in the service and in the context of love. He didn't use the truth as a weapon or as a means of coercion. He used it to point to life that is free, to call us towards something better. And people saw not just power in him, but authority. The crowd in the synagogue in Capernaum didn't see him as a rhinoceros in a restaurant, pure force and power. Even when he did something amazing and powerful, what they saw in him was authority. Did you notice that? After the exorcism, after the fireworks have stopped and the room is quiet again, the people don't say to one another, "Look how powerful this guy is. He must be a superhero." No, they say, "What is this? A new teaching with authority." This is what they see in Jesus, someone they could choose to follow, someone they could choose to love. In this day, when too many leaders around us can wield power but very little authority, Jesus stands alone. He who refused to use power to control all the way to the end invites us to let him be the authority for us, telling the truth about our lives and about the world, showing us what love requires, reminding us where love must go. Amen.